I'm just going to quickly introduce the speakers, and I'm really excited that we have a really rich panel of practitioners. So I'm looking forward to this as well, being a wildfire practitioner myself. Brian Borella, would you raise your hand, Brian? Brian is the chair of the Colorado Association of State Floodplain Managers. He's also a professional engineer and certified floodplain manager for Olson Associates. Mark Brell will be speaking second. Mark is the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project Field Operations Specialist for the City of Flagstaff Fire Department. And then we'll have a joint presentation by Vance Fossinger and Tim Mitros. Vance is the Colorado Stormwater Operations Manager for Wilson and Company Engineers and Architects. And Tim is the Development Review and Stormwater Manager for the City of Colorado Springs. So that's a lot of stormwater in titles, but rest assured there's a nice balance of the flood and the fire topics. And I posed some questions, and we generally talked about some topics to guide each of these presentations. So hopefully you'll see some themes. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian and we'll get started. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Molly, and I do have a timer running just in case, but if I start going a little too far in, let me know. You guys are lucky. I've got 3 embedded videos, which were fantastic, but they're not working. So the chances of me staying within 20 minutes are pretty good. I've got 37 slides. You can count along with me. This is slide 1. Now we're already at slide 2. See how fast we're moving. The agenda's pretty quiet today. Honestly, I've only got 4 big things to share with you, and I want to spend most of my time talking about the 4th one, which are strategies for the future, and ways that we can turn the buzzword resilience into actual practice these days. So let's start with the fire I'm most familiar with, the wildfire near Fort Collins, Colorado. That was High Park, which started in June of 2012. Here are the 4 major fires that have occurred in the Front Range in the past 4 years: High Park, Black Forest, 4 Mile, and of course Waldo Canyon. The High Park fire one is the most northerly one, and that is one that burned right outside of Fort Collins, Colorado in Laramie County. Of the 355 square miles affected, all of these sequentially, except the 4 Mile, High Park was the worst of its time, then was exceeded by Waldo Canyon, then that was exceeded as the worst fire in state's history by Black Canyon. So I hate to see what happens next. I mean, seriously. When this is what High Park fire looks like from the air near Pingree Park, you know you have a problem. And I was actually out of country when this happened. We saw it on CNN World News in Rome, the only English-speaking station we could find at our hotel, and it was headline British fellow saying, "Wildfires in Colorado." And we looked at the screen and we're like, holy smokes, that's Fort Collins. So this is what we were seeing third of the way around the world. And this is what I was seeing the very next week when we came back in town. It burned continuously for over a month. And that was a long time for the city to be encapsulated in smoke. We weren't used to that in Fort Collins. Started by lightning strike, burned for a long time, technically 21 days. Lots and lots of area, 259 homes destroyed. And to give you an idea, when I first gave this presentation in Seattle, I showed them that the burn area was larger than the metro area of Seattle. That's not city limits, 84 square miles, it's the larger metro area, so you can get an idea of the footprint of the hazard itself and what it did. And for those of our colleagues who aren't familiar with wildfire, and I showed this the other day recently, here's the basic fundamental equation of how fire works in pretty much every western state in the United States. You take fire, you add it to trees, you get this. Then you add a little bit of water to the mix, and what comes from the forest then is flash flooding, erosion, massive debris, and my favorite, water quality degradation. And those of you who have been to Fort Collins know that we have the best beer in the world, and you can't argue that point with me, it's too late. And the water coming down that feeds into those breweries smells like campfire. That's a problem for those breweries, a big problem. And they were very concerned. And it smelled like campfire for about 2 years, until the 2013 flood. Really helped things out. Here's some of the alluvial fans that we were seeing in the Cache la Poudre River. All these tributaries that were burned were bringing in massive deposits of sediment, debris as well, and boulders obviously the size of cars, stuff you were all familiar with. Speaking of boulders, here's one run, a tributary that sits right over State Highway 14, a mile marker 115. If it happens to be thunderstorming in the day, when you're driving through Poudre Canyon, stay in Poudre Park, do not drive through here. That's me for scale. That's how big those boulders are, and some of them were big enough that we could have rolled them over physically without assistance. They're just waiting to come down. They came down once, by the way, that's why we were up there. And debris. Oh my gosh, the debris volume that we've seen has been unbelievable. So is the erosion. Here's my colleague Matt Fader for scale. On one of the smaller tributaries that tends to blow out, this is Skin Gulch and Stoke Prairie Road. And we saw all kinds of bizarre behavior. Those of you who work in fire science know that you can see some very strange erosion features after a fire, things that seem to almost defy the laws of physics. This is essentially the entire Hyde Park fire burn area, all of its sub-watersheds and the severity of the burn. The western third of the burn area, all of this is either U.S. Forest Service land or wilderness. The middle third is a mix of private and U.S. Forest Service National Forest land. And then most of the western area, the eastern side, the eastern third is private land. So you could say it was roughly half and half private and federal land. That becomes a big darn deal when we start looking at places like Bluestone Creek, a little sub-watershed, where we saw the post-fire hydrology change drastically. Pre-fire, we had very small discharges coming out of this ephemeral stream. Now it has a peak flow and a base flow that are beyond comprehension. And you can see in some cases we've had almost a six-fold increase in discharge. We're seeing these storms come through on a regular basis. We've had 3 storms in the last 2 years that have exceeded 1,000 CFS. Exceeded 1,000 CFS. That's only a 10-year storm now. That's greater than the old 100-year storm. This is all very familiar to you guys, right? Feel free to shake your head no if you disagree. That's okay. I want to know my audience. You're still with me? Good. Okay. This would have been one of the videos. Imagine, if you will, this is Jill Laura Peza. She's our water quality expert from the Hyde Park Fire Team. Had her hands in the water. This is the Cache la Poudre River, which is usually gin clear. The water quality is so high in this river that the drinking water standards cannot be met unless Fort Collins Utilities adds chemicals and minerals to the mix to meet the EPA standards. That's how pure this water is. And when she was in the water getting her hands dirty, she could pull her hands out and they looked almost clean. Almost everything that you're seeing there is completely wash load. Organic wash load coming off the burn area on a regular basis. The debris would come through first, then the boulders would start rolling through, and then this wash load would stick around for hours after every thunderstorm. Every single thunderstorm. So obviously we were motivated as a collection of communities, seeing photos like the last one, to move into some kind of action. And we did, because the flooding started almost immediately, and the flash flooding on a scale that we've never seen in the northern Colorado area. One of the things that we did notice right away is that the hydrophobic soils were not just shedding water faster than we had expected, but the soils themselves were actually leaving the watershed and ending up in the Cache la Poudre River. All the way down to the South Platte, all the way down into our neighboring states in Nebraska. I heard stories from Oglala, Nebraska, all the way down to North Platte and further, where the South Platte and the North Platte come together, that there was an organic plume of material that's being transported that far downstream. In steep gradient streams, this is the general behavior that you see in a burned watershed, and these soils become hydrophobic. And by hydrophobic, I mean they shed every drop of water. This stuff is almost like ceramic. And the stuff that isn't ceramic, the stuff that wasn't cooked or baked down to ceramic, immediately leaves. I've seen 2 or 3 vertical feet of material just move from hillsides, less than 50 feet from a ridge or a summit. Unheard of, Ron. Absolutely unheard of. Those of you who say you can't get concentrated flow within 300 feet of the top of the watershed, you're actually wrong, and I have pictures to prove it. And this is what it looks like from the top of the watershed looking down. And what I hate most about this photo is there was a nice woman named Yoko Franks who lived in this home with her husband shortly after the fire. He passed away. She stayed on the land for a while. Every single time it rained, her driveway would wash out. She's 73. She's in better shape than everybody in this room, I guarantee it. But she has to walk 2 miles, 700 feet vertically, to get in and out of her house so somebody can pick her up on the highway and take her out to get groceries. She has since moved from the site. She can't live here anymore. That's a problem. These are the kind of problems we were dealing with. To give you an idea of how many problems we had as far as flooding goes, and with it the debris and the erosion and the sediment transport across State Highway 14, we had many minor and major delays in the first part of 2013. And again, this is a year after the fire. But then things got bad in July, August, and especially September. There were 18 road closures that year. The year prior, there were 23 of the state highway. The nearest detour to get to the west slope from the east slope is to go up through Wyoming and Laramie back down to Walden to get to the same side of where you want to be traveling 14, or you have to take Trail Ridge Road if it's open, or you have to take Interstate 70. The detours were hundreds of miles longer than the straight route that was being disrupted by State Highway 14 from Hyde Park Fire Run. This is my favorite video. It shows it in 48 seconds. And again, imagine if you will. You can go from no flow whatsoever during a thunderstorm to having this black, and you can see it here, it says black as molasses, having this black tarry material come all the way down through the watershed within 48 seconds. That watershed, which is extremely steep, we're talking 10 to 15% longitudinal, was flowing greater than chest deep on me. I wasn't in there, trust me, or I wouldn't be here to tell you this today. But in 48 seconds, they went from no flow to absolutely raging flow, the kind of flow that destroys watersheds, rips out all the vegetation, and after this it was completely denuded down to gravel. And we were seeing this in every single watershed and every single storm in 2013. So obviously we were motivated to do something. And this is my favorite set of slides. This is in Larimer County, in Poudre Park. Here's the flood water coming through. And for those of you who are engineers, you can see the water's moving from right to left around these sandbags. Clearly there have been problems before. Look at the splash up on this building. You can measure the height of that splash, take the velocity, square it, divide it by 2 times the force of gravity, or the acceleration due to gravity, v squared over 2g. You can then back out the total velocity of this storm. It was running over 22 feet per second through here. Nobody can stand up and flow that fast. Nobody. No road, no people. That car floated. That garage actually crumpled up shortly after that photo was taken. But this is what really scared me in the Stain storm. They had a propane tank become dislodged, it ruptured, and this white stuff you're seeing, that's propane gas. In a rainstorm, that gas is more dense than the air around it, and because it was high humidity, 100% humidity, it would not dissipate. So this gas stuck around and people fled for their lives. And I'm not talking about, just walking uphill. These are people running up 45-degree slopes because they're afraid in the 8 homes in which this propane gas was floating that there was going to be ignition, and then every home would have been gone. Thank goodness there was no ignition. And I think they were lucky that the power went out when all of this happened, because anything could have happened. And, again, here we see Larimer County residents truly running for their lives. These are the problems that come around during and after fires. So money showed up, right? We got $7.3 million from Senators Udall and Bennett in the form of emergency watershed protection financing to go out and do work that would protect life safety and property from further damage. Caveat though, we had to put everything back where it was, and we were not allowed to use that money on federal lands. No exceptions. So how do you spend $7.5 million in 9 months? And we'll show you. You get fire boss Kevin Gerdig, who's now the utility director, project manager Ginger Purvis, and then you get Lucas Moutet and Jared Heath. You get Jack Everett and Jill. Jack and Jill. It's still funny. They still have it. It's okay. And Rita, who did all of our finance, and me. We were the fire recovery specialists. We were working for Fort Collins Utilities, the City of Greeley Water, and Larimer County as co-sponsors under the NRCS. And I love showing this slide because it really shows you this dude from Jessica Hagee. X is what you're expected to do, Y is what you want to do, and Z is the insomnia that occurs in between when they don't overlap. Best intentions. We learned a lot from this experience. Trust me, it didn't go according to plan. The one thing that did go according to plan are the mulch drops. We spent $5.5 million just on mulching the upper part of the most severe sections of the watershed to try and stabilize the soils that were being destabilized by the storms that were coming through regularly. So what you would see had you seen this video, and this is my favorite because I wasn't actually taking this video at the time, I handed my iPad up to the fellow from NRCS. He said, I want to get a picture of this drop, and I saw which way the wind was moving, and I went for cover. This is 2 1/4 tons of wood shred mulch. And the wood shred mulch is essentially the size of your cell phone if you've got one of these, or bigger, or smaller. And in that wood shred mulch, what they've done is they've taken an entire log, run it through a machine, just like a cat on a scratching post, scratches the heck out of it, and you leave these big shredded pieces of wood mulch that are supposed to catch the intercepting raindrops, prevent mobilization at the top of the watershed, therefore you don't get erosion, right? Well, this bundle, when it comes down, has bigger pieces in it that are the size of 2x4s, and you see them, and you can hear them whipping out, and they're zzz, 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 and they're coming right at you. So, of course, I heard that. I went for cover because I'd been up there before. The NRCS guy has my iPad, getting a video, and I just said, hey, that iPad's impact resistant, but you may want to cover it. He did not get hit. I did. I was under a boulder. We had hard hats and safety vests on, but we did. It rained all around him and didn't hit him, so he has better luck than I do. If you ever buy a lottery ticket, bet on him, not me. But these drops were pretty fantastic, and we did thousands of these. $5.5 million worth of these. And this is what it looked like. All the material was dropped off by truck. It was bundled up and then dropped by helicopters. We had 5 helicopters at a time moving, 7 total in the fleet, so 2 would peel off, always moving in pairs, load back up for fuel, come back to the site, people would take breaks, and whenever there was lightning, everybody was grounded. I was actually on site when one of these helicopters was struck, and the pilot was not happy. This is the ending result. We need at least 70% cover on the most burned part of the watershed. Notice there's not a tree alive in here. It's all standing dead. These are widowmakers, the ones that snap without warning. These were the areas we had to inspect. This is Hill Gulch, one that I inspected. 45-degree slopes. I was in much better shape then than I am today. Okay, so we had to document all this. We had to go out and find information on the ground, ensure the senators within a 5-year period that the investment that they made with EWP money was actually paying off. And this cracked me up. This is day 1. We actually had a guy fall down. He didn't hurt himself, but I snapped that photo. And NRCS was really mad when I showed it to him and laughed. They didn't find the humor. Lucas was messing around. We didn't mess around again after that. We did get one capital project out of it. I was a project engineer on that. A $400,000 job. We had $500,000 to do it. We got it done for $400,000, delivered it on time and under budget. We had to stabilize a creek with a 15-foot vertical head cut, and there's 2 raw water pipelines behind this that feed the city of Fort Collins. Half of its water supply comes through here. Those pipes were exposed. We uncovered them, we recovered them, put in channel of stabilization. This is what it looked like after the project was done. But the rest of it was all done. Mostly all that money was spent just on mulching. This is my dog, the Suze. She shows up at every one of my presentations. She has no purpose in here except to make you smile. Works for me. Better practices of mitigation in 3 minutes are, starting with a statement from Chris Sturm with the Colorado Water Conservation Board, if you could rebuild it all over again, would you do it the same way? That's the question I'm asking you and that we're asking ourselves right now. So my first recommendation is to treat wildfire disasters as a prelude to flood disasters. They are one and the same. If it burns, it will flood. Those of you who were in Seattle last year at ASFPM, remember I got you to say fire, flood, fire, flood. I never want those 2 ideas to be disconnected in the Intermountain West of the United States. And if we manage these flood threats and these wildfire threats together, then it should make sense that we share resources. And when we're talking about resources and hazards, I'm not talking about just flooding. I'm not talking about the embers are out, okay, type 1 team, pack up, go home. We've got other hazards that need to be communicated out that were not being communicated out until I worked with the PIO to start sending messages by Twitter. Larimer County Sheriff said, hey, that's a good idea. Maybe we should start doing that. CDOT said, hey, that's a good idea. Why doesn't the Transportation Department do that? And then they started talking and I could shut up and get back to work. So use all your media possible and work as a watershed team. That's what the stream teams, the watershed coalitions, and the watershed alliances are doing in Colorado right now. They're sharing resources as stakeholders in the watershed, not only as private citizens, but also government agencies and NGOs, non-government organizations. And if you're going to break this fire, flood, erosion, damage cycle, you've got to do it at the source. The bottom line is, on the east coast of the United States, and I love the example of New York City that's given to us by our former director at the water utility in Fort Collins. They actually own a part of their watershed, they fence it off, and they keep people away. That's not the benefit of public land, obviously, but for protecting a water source that millions of people rely on for drinking water in their daily survival, that's probably a good idea. So I'm going to say, if you want to break this fire, flood, erosion, damage cycle, you've got to manage all of your assets as truly that. If somebody says natural resources to me, I correct them. I say a resource is something we plunder. An asset is something that we protect. Let's consider these natural assets and treat them accordingly. And if you want to break this cycle that I showed you before, do it right here between the actual fire and the actual forest resource itself. Spend the money in mitigation so you don't end up with a burned product. You're protecting the resource. Largely, in this case, it's the watershed and the trees and the undergrowth that grow within it, so that when it rains, the rest of these are all taken care of and you don't have a problem. Right? Very simple. Very simple. Difficult to execute, simple to talk about. I have one more recommendation after this one. I say it's time for us to identify all hazards and give them a little bit of a buffer. Not just flood, not just fire, but let's recognize that even in flooded areas where you have a flood-mapped area from FEMA on this side, you're still going to get damage clear over here outside the special flood hazard area. Classic question. Do you live in a floodplain, yes or no? And Thomas asks that all the time. Everybody does. And nature will show you where that floodplain is occasionally. I don't think erosion listens to any of our boundaries. I don't think channels are anything but dynamic. These are living and breathing entities. These are organisms in your watershed. And I think if you give those watershed features some setback, you're going to save lives. And once you have an inventory of your assets, it's up to you all as practitioners and you all who work in government as agents of the public trust to do something with that. And my last recommendation, always need more helicopters. Always. Can't argue that point of view. Just like the beer in Fort Collins. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for listening. And I would like for my next colleague to come up, pick up where I leave off. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brian. Let's do the fire, flood, fire, flood. I like that. It's pretty appropriate and a great segue there, especially when Brian's talking about how you can break your cycle. Yeah, my name is Mark Brell. I'm the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project Field Operations Specialist. I don't put that on my shirt anymore. It takes up too much ink. With the Flagstaff Fire Department in Flagstaff, Arizona, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about our Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project. We also call it FWPP for just the sake of too many words. Well, thanks for coming here to listen to us speak today. I'm really thrilled to be here. It's hard sometimes getting up in front of all these people. I went to school to become a forester because I wanted to work in the woods and not have to deal with people. And then I fight fire because fighting fire is a lot less scary than standing up in front of a big room of people. So you may feel differently, but I'm glad to be here and have something to talk about, something great to talk about. You know, it really excites me, and you know, being able to share a story that hopefully is a good story and will continue to be. But if you're not familiar with Flagstaff, Arizona, we're right sort of in the northern central part of the state, right where Interstate I-40 and I-17 come together, just south of the Grand Canyon. A great place if you haven't been there. We do have trees. We are in the middle of the largest contiguous ponderosa pine forest. We have a great little downtown. Pluto made the news recently. Flagstaff is the home of Pluto and Percival Lowell's Observatory. And we have, you know, diversity in our environment. We have mountains that go up to 12,700 feet roughly, and then canyons, drainages, flats. Pretty diverse area around us. So Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project is a pretty unique partnership between the City of Flagstaff, Coconino National Forest, the Arizona State Forestry Division, State Land Department, and Coconino County, which surrounds us. We got together to put together this project called the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project, designed to protect our forest, protect our community, maintain a healthy, vibrant ecosystem, and keep our city safe and sustainable. So the project itself, FWPP, is a project funded by a $10 million bond, a voter-approved bond, to do work in two different watersheds that are crucial to our city. One is the Rio de Flag watershed. You can see here, this is the boundary of our city. And this yellow polygon, a little washed out here, is the northern part of our project in what we call the Dry Lake Hills, which is in the Rio de Flag watershed. And then we have another part down here, this orange duck-looking seahorse polygon is on Mormon Mountain, which is part of the Lake Mary watershed, where we actually pull roughly half of our municipal drinking water in the summertime. The lake is actually right there, hard to see there. So the project is somewhat twofold. It's designed to fund planning and treatments in the forest designed to reduce the impacts of flood. And we have, you know, these two areas. And the impact up here is going to be the direct impact of flood waters coming into downtown. We're talking massive 5-foot walls of mud, muck, and debris inundating a large part of our city. Downtown, our university campus, Northern Arizona University, several large neighborhoods. We have Interstate I-40, we have the Burlington Northern Santa Fe rail line, all right in the target of that sort of sub-watershed right there. And then also down here, it's about protecting our water supply the quality and quantity of our water supply. Should that Mormon Mountain area burn and we have significant flooding after that, it'll fill our reservoir with sediment and change the composition to a point that our current treatment system will not be able to process that water. And we're looking at anywhere from roughly $22 to $40 million just to get the water supply up back online right there. So what's really unique about this project is that it is a voter-approved bond to do work on federal land, federal and state land. And as far as we know, it's pretty much the first time this has happened, where a municipality took it on themselves to put the money out there to do work outside of their own jurisdiction. And the reason why we did this is pretty apparent. The fire threat is certain and real, and it's annual. It happens every year. And it's pretty played out. It's not if, but when, and where, and how bad will it be. And we've seen it, and we know it's going to be bad. And some of these areas that haven't burned, we know they're going to be worse than some other areas. We have a lot of steep slopes with perfect alignment, and in the fire world, alignment is where the area on fire is aligned with your predominant winds and the aspect and the slope, and you can really get a fast-moving, high-severity fire that is pretty devastating and all-out catastrophic in times. And we know that in these areas, it's outside of our jurisdiction. It's not city land, it's Forest Service land, but the impacts will be ours. We could see the Dry Lake Hills and the Rio de Flag watershed totally nuked out in 8 hours or less. One burning period, one operational period, and that can be gone. And the impacts will be devastating to our community for many, many decades. And we know state and federal funding is uncertain. There are a lot of plans, there's a lot of work going on in the forest around us. There's the Forest Restoration Initiative and a lot of other great projects. But some of these areas they're not going to tackle right away. We have some areas that are not too enticing for some of these projects. We have steep slopes, we have environmental issues with endangered species, particularly Mexican spotted owl. This is right in our backyard, and it's our view shed from Flagstaff. So there's the aesthetic issues, the recreation issues, steep slopes that make traditional ground-based operations pretty impractical. And then what we really want to do up there is not very financially attractive to anybody. We really need to remove a lot of the small, unmerchantable material up there. So there's really no economic incentive to do a lot of work up there. And so because of those reasons, treatments aren't planned in these areas under FORFRI for a long time, if at all. And we also know, the long-term cost of recovery far outweighs proactive action. We've seen this. We had, in 2010, the Schultz Fire, which was a pretty devastating fire in our community, actually one ridge over from our current project area. And really was a driver in encouraging us to begin this project. That fire burned 15,000 acres, cost $12 million to suppress. But since then, the full cost of that fire is approaching about $150 million and continuing to rise. There's still work going on there to protect communities, but we saw 2 lives lost in the flood, not the fire. The fire burned up the mountain and away from homes, but it was afterwards, the floods that came down and were so devastating to the community. Destroyed a number of homes, decreased property values, damaged a lot of infrastructure. $150 million, after the smoke is out and the Type 1 team is gone. And so we took that study, which was kind of eye-opening to see what the big cost is when all the smoke is gone. And we moved it over, one ridge back over to our project area that really has 3 main drainages that feed right into Flagstaff proper. The Schultz Fire was on the sort of north and east side of the mountain and burned away from town, and the floods went into a relatively rural area outside of the city. So we moved the study over and said, well, what would our cost avoidance be for spending $10 million to do forest treatments in these areas? And a very conservative number. I have a lot of things I wanted to include, but very conservative numbers, $573 to $1.2 billion in cost avoided by spending $10 million to do some treatments in our forested watersheds. So how do we get here? How do we get voter approval for this? How do we go from the idea 20 years ago that all trees are good and all fires are bad, to now my crew in the City of Flagstaff Fire Department has now cut 2.5 million trees, and that thumb's tired from the clicker. And from the idea that forest management, fire management is a federal issue, it's their problem, let them deal with it, to now having voter-approved funding to take ownership and take the initiative to do the work that needs to be done, that we know we're going to suffer the consequences if that work isn't done. So it's really taken a long time. You know, the project was sort of imagined in 2011 after learning about the Payment for Ecosystem Services approach being used in Santa Fe. They have a municipal watershed that's closed off and protected, and they collect a fee tacked onto the water bill that they use for forest management, restoration activities to protect their drinking water supply. So we kind of approached the city leadership with that in March of 2012 after trying, kicking it around over the winter and saying, will this really work? Can we do this? And then in July 2012, we have a meeting with all of the staff heads and department heads, city manager, and city manager said, it's a go. And, after hearing some other information, he said, we're not even going to go for an ecosystem services approach. We're going with the bond because we need the money now. Because we realize that this issue hanging above us in our watershed could burn any day. I mean, I'm surprised it hasn't burned already. The location, the alignment with, the slope topography aspect, the number of ignition sources with the heavy recreation being so close to town, it's really amazing that we haven't lost it before. So we realized we had to do this quick, and we couldn't wait to accumulate money and do this incrementally. So the decision was made in March that we're going to push forward with a bond initiative. And then in July 2012, our city council approved it for the ballot, and then in November 2012, it was on the ballot for public decision. So it seems like a short timeline, 2011, it was summer 2011 to fall 2012, but really, what helped us succeed started so long ago, and really it started in 1996. And my friend Steve tells me all the time, he says, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that they'll connect somehow in your future. And that's what's really happened. A lot of people have helped us get to where we are today and make this project a success. And many of those people that helped, 5, 10, 20 years ago, they might not even know it, but they were instrumental in getting us to where we are today. So back in 1996, it was a turning point for us, and it was really a bad fire season in Arizona and throughout much of the West. We had multiple large fires that summer. We had the largest fire in the Coconino National Forest just north of town. As soon as it was contained, 2 weeks later, it was surpassed by the next largest fire in history on the National Forest. We had multiple fires going within city limits. Pretty much, you could look in any direction and see a giant smoke plume. We even had a fire that got to over 100 acres before anyone even reported it because there were so many fires, everybody just thought we all knew about it already. So we had a frightened community. We had the Ecological Restoration Institute at Northern Arizona University was becoming active in forest restoration. We had a lot of agency leadership and organizational leadership willing to step forward and take a risk. We had all the right players at the right time in the right place. And together we formed a collaborative called the Greater Flagstaff Forest Partnership, which has really worked through the years to promote forest restoration, bring the public along with us, try to bring science into the equation and adaptively manage to restore our forest. We were basically doing what the National Cohesive Strategy has prescribed. We were doing it long before I even knew that. We were helping create the resilient landscape, resilient communities, and increasing the effectiveness of fire response by doing the work in the forest. But here, we had many others since then, since '96 turning points. We had a woody fire coming into town. Part of my crew, I think it was a 2 millionth tree they cut there. A lot of public interaction, volunteer work, community meetings out in the forest, and then showing the community what we can do in town. That's a house right there. We burn right up to houses, right up to the foundations in town. So we've really gotten the community on our side, built a lot of social license and trust. Then 2010 was another big turning point for us. We had the Schultz Fire here, you can see on the left, and actually just right here is the main part of our project area. This fire, you can sort of see a little smudge there. That was a 300-acre fire that occurred the day before the Schultz Fire, and I was somewhere down there in that smoke. And you can see, not much left there. This is our water line road that gives us 30% of our domestic water from the wells on the mountain. And pretty well nuked there. This is some helicopter mulching going on there. Shortly after the fire, 2 weeks after it was contained, we had several inches of rain. Probably about a 200-year storm is what people are suspecting. And we had these drainages wash out. There's about 40 drainages that washed out pretty severely. Some of them 60 feet wide, 35 feet deep. Here's one of them. You can see the pipe right there. There's that same guy still looking down at the pipe, just shaking his head. 28 breaks in the pipe, $4.5 million to repair. Pretty significant impact. And all that debris, mud, and muck, and water ended up downslope in these neighborhoods, destroyed some houses. We actually found part of that pipe that was a turn-of-the-century pipe down in this neighborhood, a mile away from where it was originally on the mountain. Washed that far. So when it came time, we mapped out what we would have in Flagstaff if we had the same fire in the slopes. This is downtown, totally flooded. Major neighborhoods flooded. Pretty significant. So when it came time, when we realized we had this opportunity and we had a need to do this work in the slopes of uptown, we had the existing foundation and the awareness of the threat. It was not new. We'd seen it. Our neighbors had experienced it. We had a history of leadership and action. We had partnerships, interdisciplinary partnerships that have been wonderful. And we've had a lot of proven results. So the timing was right. And when we went to a vote, we had 74% approve the bond, the $10 million bond. Most people thought, that it was a wise investment and they wanted to support the work, support forest health, forest restoration. And what was really funny, we did some exit poll surveys. Half of the people that voted for this thought that their out-of-pocket expenses were going to go up about $250 a year. They still felt strongly enough to support this. And really, the taxes weren't going up, and really replacing an existing bond. 26%, they felt it was a waste of money, they couldn't afford it. Never going to get everybody. So, current project status, we have a draft record of decision for the federal land out right now, looking at a final record of decision in September. We've begun implementation on city and state lands. We've done over 1,200 acres. I have a 1,000-acre timber sale starting next week. We've built a monitoring framework to go above and beyond some of the NEPA required monitoring to really address some of the questions the voters have. And we're really pushing the public outreach and involvement, which has been immensely important to get us to where we are today and allowed us to get that 74% approval. And we expect, 8 to 10 years full completion. So, we're looking, 6 to 8 years until we're totally done. So, some of the lessons we've learned throughout this, not only implementing it, but the campaign up to it was to prepare for a marathon. It's not a sprint, and it's going to be a career-long haul. You can't just step into a project like this and think it's something you can just get going and then get back to your regular job. It's not. It's a career into itself. And go all in. Do things, talk to people, lead, set the example, jump in with both feet, and partner up. Become a known and reliable partner. Find those people who you may need in the future. You might not even know who they are. So start creating those networks of partners as soon as you can. And then leverage. Allow others to contribute to your success. Success begets success and money as well. And there are a lot of people that have ideas, and you can find the synergy and leverage each other for mutual success. Build on a history of success. Look at that small and incremental change. Document what you can and promote that, and promote those successes and saves, fire success stories. And when the time's right, jump. We had the catalyzing event of the Schultz fire and the floods, and for us the timing was right. I think we still would have succeeded, but that certainly was the time for us to jump. Then target your message to those who will decide. My issue is fire and forest health, but many of the folks in the public, it's water supply, quality of life, and they're very much linked. And hold your hands. We're all in this together. I think people need to relearn collaboration oftentimes. People think collaboration is something for everybody else in the room, not for me. But hold hands, don't shout, work together, leave your agendas at the door. And then prepare for catastrophic success. Like I said, things like this can be a career-long haul, so get ready for it. Shortly after our approval in the polls, Arizona Republic had this article, or this statement in an article, which I really loved, and that in Flagstaff, reality was more important than blame. So I'll leave you at that, and we'll move on to the next presenter here, and thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. My name's Vance Fossier. I work for Wilson & Company, and I've had the good opportunity to be the project manager for what we call the Camp Creek Drainage Project in Colorado Springs. Camp Creek was one of the watersheds that was greatly impacted by the Waldo Canyon fire in 2012. I'm going to start this presentation by taking you through some things about the fire, and then I'm going to end that up with some of the effects of the fire from a flooding and erosion standpoint. I'm going to talk a little bit about public process, and then I'm going to hand things off to Tim to talk about it from a city standpoint and some of the things he's done in mitigation and getting funding together. We had a great shock in the year of 2012, the year in Colorado Springs. We've been fairly isolated from wildfire danger for about 60 years. It was about the last major wildfire that had happened in Colorado Springs. Amazing, really, the amount of forest we've got around there and the little amount of mitigation we got on in the forest. But in 2012, a very hot day after a long dry period, about noon, I came out of my office building and looked toward the mountains, and there was a huge plume of smoke. And the reality set in that we were in for something big. It was the day the fire was spotted, and it grew rapidly that day. 3 days later, I think many of us who couldn't see what was going on in the mountain thought maybe the fire was getting under control as the smoke was kind of lighting down and blowing to the west, and we weren't really seeing it. It was an extremely hot day. I think we set a record that day, 101 degrees, which is really unheard of in Colorado Springs on a hot circumstance. Very low humidity, and the fire blew up. Developed this huge cumulus cloud above the city, and it grew almost 11,000 acres in one day. Phenomenal. Later in the day, the fire jumped to containment lines. 26,000 people were evacuated, and it's amazing that they got out. Because later in the day, not very much later, a little storm happened to the north of the city, cooled things down, and that cloud collapsed, which brought the fire down the mountain and into the city at 65 miles an hour. In the aftermath, we discovered there were 2 deaths and 346 homes destroyed that day. All in all, when the fire was finally put out, it had burned 18,000 acres, and just between Colorado Springs and Pikes Peak, and impacted a great deal of the city's watersheds. I'm going to drill down in Camp Creek, the watershed that I'm most familiar with now. Camp Creek is the largest watershed in the Bird Scar. It's almost 10 square miles, and almost 70% of it were burned. So if you look at this area, this is all national forest. Just down below that is what's known as Glen Eyrie. Just down below that, is something that's probably known to most of you, Garden of the Gods Park, and below that, a residential neighborhood. For those of you that have visited Colorado Springs, I'll just give you some landmarks along Camp Creek. Just down below the Queens Canyon, which is the Forest Service land, is Glen Eyrie. That's the estate of our founding father, General Palmer. Just down below that is Garden of the Gods Park, Rockledge Ranch, and then a very aesthetic channel, which runs down 31st Street, this concrete channel, that runs through the neighborhood of Pleasant Valley. Talk a little bit about the effects of the fire after it was all out. We've seen a lot of sediment, erosion, abrasion from sediment, and increased threat of flooding. Wanted to include this photo taken by Tim Mitros here, just to show you the extremes in this watershed. This is the divide between Camp Creek and Douglas Creek, with Camp Creek being on the right side of this slope and Douglas Creek being on the north side. And that's the city beyond. You can see the elevation difference and the steepness of these slopes and the makeup of those slopes. A lot of decomposed granite on very steep slopes. We've talked a lot about the processes of erosion today already, so I won't get into this too deeply. But what happens in the watershed, it no longer has the capacity to take the water in that falls on it, so you've got a lot more runoff coming off. It develops small rills, which are just small drainage ditches. Those small rills collect more and more water. That turns into a gully on these steep slopes, carries more sediment downstream. You end up with a alluvial fan down at the bottom, which is just sediment staged up, ready to go down the channel in the next big event. This just zooms in on that. You can see an alluvial fan here, and these are rills over here on the slope. Downstream of the canyon, we're seeing erosion in channels. When we seal up the soils and take away the vegetation, runoff comes at a lot more frequent basis, and the events happen. They're extended out over a long period of time. So we're seeing erosion. I'm starting to hear a theme here. It seems like fires. A few years later, maybe you see record rainfalls. We've seen record rainfalls in Colorado Springs in the fall of 2013 and again this year. Where you've got erosion, somewhere downstream you're going to have sedimentation, and we've certainly seen that. In 2013, in 1 week's time, the north end of Garden of the Gods Park went from the upper photo to the lower photo. Between that and what was deposited in Glen Eyrie, we figured there were 15,000 cubic yards that needed to be hauled off that year. Here's a problem that's just not intuitive, but it's certainly happening. In Colorado Springs, we have a lot of concrete channels, mostly built in the 70s and 80s. Hard to get rid of them because they're put in very confined spots. What we're seeing is where you've got weak concrete, this sediment is moving down the channel almost at every event. The photo there at the lower left or lower right is fairly low flow. You can see the sediment particles dancing in the water. When you get about a foot of water in the channel, you can see cantaloupe-type particles jumping in and out there. I've stood and watched these particles work into those cracks, like what we're showing up here. Any disturbance in the bottom of that channel, that sediment gets locked in there, and it rolls around a few times. These particles are very sharp-edged, hard, decomposed granite. Ultimately, what you end up with is something like this. After you get enough degradation in there, you get enough space under the channel's floor that the water gets underneath and starts to lift it out. We've seen increased risk of flooding. The reason I put the word risk there is we've been fortunate that even though we've seen record rainfalls, we haven't seen the intense events. So we really haven't seen huge flood events. The floods that have occurred have been from sediment blocking the channel and pushing water elsewhere. We've been fortunate so far. Camp Creek Basin has some unique hydrology. We think the increase in the 100-year storm is about another third of the flow. In the smaller storms, of course, that's a much greater increase. I want to talk a little bit about public information, community involvement, and how to get support for projects. The city has done a great job. And having not dealt with wildfire for 60 years, I think the staff has stepped up beyond what should be expected. They got right out and started having flood hazard awareness meetings in several of the watersheds soon after the event. They did a lot of education, and I didn't recognize the full benefit until a few months later we started a flood hazard mitigation project. And the public that was showing up at our meetings was very aware and already schooled in a lot of the issues. Building support. The city hired Wilson & Company to manage a consultant team in the fall of 2013. Included in that team were people from AMEC, TAPAS, and Keziah Watkins. The job the city hired us for was to come up with a plan for Camp Creek for improvements. This watershed hadn't been planned since 1965, so an update was needed. Camp Creek has a lot of stakeholders. This community of Pleasant Valley is a very tight-knit group, really like their community. We knew that we were going to have to get them very involved in the process to ever get anywhere. So the city brought us on board. We formulated a plan for public involvement and got great community response. I've included a little graphic here in the bottom. I'm not sure if it's readable or not, but I'll tell you what it says. This pie chart is a survey, or the results of a survey that we gave at the end of the public process. We asked people what was most important about this process. And I was surprised at first. You know, one of those small slivers was the project team. I mean, when you put together something like this, you really want that to be, you know, the most important part to be you. But really, I think this was right. We felt good about it. The biggest part was that blue spot over there, giving our input. People like to be heard. The red spot was information. We pushed out a lot of information to keep these people informed. They like that. This is a little bit about our decision process. Those 4 blue boxes up there are ovals. Those were our meetings. We started with trying to learn what was important to these folks. All the stakeholders, anybody that wanted to have input in the channel. What was important to them? What were their goals for the project? We then developed some tools that we could get feedback from folks on how they wanted this project to be shaped. We then refined what we heard from them as far as how a project should look. And then we rolled that out in a final public meeting, telling them what we'd come up with. The result of this was to come up with a plan that was supported both by the city and the community in 8 months. We felt real good about that. With that, I'll turn it over to Tim.
Hello everyone, my name is Tim Mitros. I'm the Development Review and Stormwater Manager. Before the fire, the City of Colorado Springs had a stormwater fee, a stormwater enterprise, and actually my colleague is Ken Sampley at the time. He was in charge of that whole program, and he's now at Fort Collins because the citizens voted out the stormwater program. So unfortunately for me, I was managing our development review group, and so they put stormwater under me, so that's where I have it. So I really didn't have much of a background in stormwater. And then we had the Waldo Canyon fire. And so we had the fire, and actually I live in the Mountain Shadows area, so I was at home. I was going to stay and protect my house, but when Van said that pyrocumulus cloud collapsed, and the fire was coming down the street sideways, I thought, I better get out of the house now. So we left and met up with a massive traffic jam of those 26,000 people, and it's like, okay, we're going to die here. But we made it. So from my standpoint, I wanted to start off with the challenges that I faced. And so the first one was knowing what to do after the fire. So you have a fire comes through, what the heck do you do next? Luckily for us, we had some experts that were dealing with the Hayman fire just up the road. Carol Licarius, what's called the Coalition of the Upper South Platte, they were formed to protect the Denver watershed. She came down and said, guess what, you guys have had a fire, that's nothing. Wait till you see the floods. And she was correct on that. So we started seeking out the experts. One of the main ones was Mr. Roskin. I don't know who knows about him, but he has a company called Wildland Hydrology, and it is out of Fort Collins. And he's a foremost expert, probably in the world, on what to do after a fire, the impacts that you're going to see, and what to do. And so he has an assessment that he does called the Watershed Assessment of River Stability and Sediment Supply. So we did that over the whole Waldo Burn area, and it came up with what are we going to have to do next. And sediment is the big issue. It's not so much the water that comes down, it's the sediment it brings. What do you do with it? You've got to keep it out of your storm sewer systems. And so further on in my presentation, I'll talk a little bit about that. And so the next thing you got to do is got to find funding. There's a lot of funding out there. You just got to find it. FEMA, NRCS, CDBG. You got general funding from your government. You got private grants. And so you got to work collaboratively with your elected officials because they'll help you. They'll go to Washington and beat the door down and get that funding you need. You got to keep the public informed and prepared. We had community meetings. We had to keep the media involved. When we do a debris basin, we bring the media out there, let them see what we're doing. One of the things I found was psychological impacts. People are impacted. Their houses have burned down. A lot of people never made it home that day. So they had pets in these houses. So it was amazing losses. And of course, we had a couple people die. And so you got to pay attention to that and find experts on your staff or in the community you can turn these people to. The funding requirements. You get this different types of funding. Each one has different requirements. Some of them require Davis-Bacon, some of them don't. You got to know that. Have a good grants manager who can direct you through this process. Maintenance. NRCS will help you build things. The National Resource Conservation Service, they do work on private property, but they have rules that you have to follow. So does FEMA, and the rules are different, so it's important to understand that. And on the maintenance portion, you've got to be prepared afterwards to pick up the costs. So for the city of Colorado Springs, a lot of these debris basins are filled in. We have to use our general funds to go in and clean them. So that's something else you have to pay attention to. And you've got to think differently after a fire. You've got to think into the future. You want something sustainable. You want resilience in your new goal. So our challenges. Sediment and debris was the big challenge for the city of Colorado Springs. We've got to keep the stuff out of our stormwater system. And this is a picture of that tree. You can see how far the sediment's going up. And as Vance mentioned, that decomposed granite just scours everything. And so we were looking at channel widening, debris nets, debris basins, log erosion barriers, seeding, and mulching. And unlike Brian, one of the things I found is experts disagree. Well, the Bear team, or from the Forest Service, dropped a lot of mulch immediately. And we had a lot of high winds, and it all ended up in the bottom of our drainages, so it really didn't help us where it did help him. So it's interesting the impacts that you see. Glen Erie channel widening. As Vance mentioned, this was built in the 1800s for General Palmer and his wife, Queenie. And the channel itself would only handle about 400 CFS. Well, they had a lot of conferences, and so one of the immediate things they did is put in a larger channel that can handle about 2,000 CFS. And they took this articulated block right up to the castle to protect it in case the water does even get out of the channel. And this is a picture of the channel now, and the grass to the right is underlain with this articulated block. There is a smaller channel that went on through Glen Erie, and this is one of the other issues we come into is that the funding from NRCS is not exactly on time. So this was actually from 2013 flooding